On behalf of the Southeast PTTC, we would love to welcome everyone to today's webinar, Engaging Youth Voices to Improve Substance Use Prevention Tips and Tools to Begin or Deepen Your Youth-Adult Partnerships. And this is presented by Dr. Ballard. I am so grateful that she is here to help share her knowledge and expertise in this field. So thank you for being here. I'm going to go ahead and start off with some housekeeping, and then I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Ballard. A really quick acknowledgement. I'm not going to read the slide, but I think it's important to highlight the bold in the third bullet. The opinions expressed herein are the view of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official position of DHHS, SAMHSA, or the Southeast PTTC. A little bit about the Southeast PTTC. We are a network of centers across the United States and a little beyond. There's 10 centers, and we are the Southeast in this green over in the far right. I think it's the far right on your side. We are housed at Wake Forest University School of Medicine, and we are led by co-directors, Drs. Wolfson and Wagner. And we also again, provide technical assistance and training to not only our region, but with webinars like this, we expand far and wide across the United States. So if you are not in our region, thank you so much for being here. We're glad that you're spending your time with us. A little housekeeping. There is a very, very short evaluation form. Your feedback is really important to us. So please take the about 3 minutes it takes to fill out that evaluation form. After you fill out that evaluation form, you'll have access to your certificate for today's webinar. So again, take a couple minutes to fill out that evaluation form. Please pause. It will take you to an external site, which is your certificate. And also, if you happen to miss it, don't worry, we'll send a post-webinar email out to everybody that includes the link for the evaluation form. We'll also include the link to where we post this on YouTube, and then also any of the materials that are presented today that will be posted on our landing page, which we'll share during the webinar, and then also in that post-webinar email. So it is my honor and privilege to be able to introduce Dr. Ballard. She is a partner, a collaborator, and she also is an associate professor at Wake Forest University School of Medicine. She has expertise in developmental psychology, social sciences, population health focused on adolescent development and well-being. She leads nationally funded research advancing youth engagement, including studies on substance use prevention, action, civics, and youth-adult partnerships. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to you, Dr. Ballard. Thank you so much for being here today and sharing your knowledge and expertise.
Thank you so much, Amber. And thanks, everybody. It's fun to see all the names rolling in and the different places people are joining from. So it's good to see you all here. Let me take just a moment and share my slides. Are you seeing my slides? I see nodding. Excellent. And you can also see maybe me at the bottom. This is a new feature that we're trying out. So hopefully that's not too distracting. I also have subtitles on, and I also hope that's not distracting, but we thought that might be helpful for some people. So we will leave that on. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you to the Southeast PTTC for inviting me today. I more and more feel like time is our absolutely most precious resource. So take that seriously to make our hour and a half together as meaningful as possible. I'm an associate professor at Wake Forest University in the School of Medicine, developmental psychologist by background, with also some background in prevention science, and really excited to talk today about how we collectively can engage youth voices to improve our substance use prevention efforts. I know some names popping up in the chat, so I know that there's some collective expertise and wisdom on this webinar about youth engagement. I also know probably there are people who've never necessarily done youth engagement before, in their youth prevention. So I think I hope that I can introduce some of you to youth engagement, add to your knowledge, and provide some tools to get started with or deepen your youth engagement practice. Let me make sure my clicking is working. Nope. How about that? There we go. In the chat, if you would, to put us in the mindset of thinking about adolescence, if you would think about yourself at age 14, and just think about one word or phrase that comes to mind that describes you at that age. So I think for many of us, we were at the end of middle school, potentially the beginning of high school. What word or phrase comes to mind? Awkward is the first one. Awkward is the second one. Naive, uncertain, quirky. I love these. Emotional, weird, irresponsible, shy, quick to say yes. Fascinating. Unsure. So we have a lot of uncertainty. Shy, a lot of shy coming in, looking for my group, people who are kind of searching. Emotional. I love it. Happy, emotional, shy. So we definitely have some themes. Confused. We absolutely have some themes coming through. Busy, curious. Awesome. Feel free to keep putting them in the chat. But the point I want to make and start us off, now that we're in the headspace of when we were 14, what were we like, is that adolescents, young people are individuals and they are complex. They have amazing attributes and challenging attributes. And I think as the words uncertain, confused, searching kind of evoke, adolescence is complicated. It's a really complicated time. And a lot of the chat references come to speak to this period of transition, which is one of the major features of adolescence, is it's such a time of transition. And how we think about and how we talk about youth really matters. And as a developmental psychologist, I like to say, and I'm a little bit embarrassed to say, that for a long time, our field talked about adolescence in a really negative way. We really talked about adolescence as a time of storm and stress. So it's absolutely true, like we just saw in the chat, that adolescence is a time of transition, uncertainty, and just a lot of changes. That is true. But developmental psychologists then decided that means it's a really negative time of storm and stress, a time where adolescents, just because of all the turmoil and what's going on in their brains and their bodies, are kind of unstable. And while that can feel true for some of us, developmental psychologists' more modern view of adolescence is really thinking about it as a window of opportunity. So for all the same reasons that we used to think of it as kind of an uncertain time of transition, now we think about it like all those changes going on in the adolescent brain and body and social system really makes it a window of opportunity for positive development. As one psychologist, Ron Dahl, puts it, we think about adolescence now as a natural tinderbox for igniting passion, a time where adolescents are passionate and idealistic and just looking for who they are and kind of searching. And that in a lot of ways, we can harness that and really think about how that sets the stage for a lot of positive development happening in adolescence. And today I want to carry through this kind of positive view of adolescence. I want to carry forward an assumption that we respect young people and think that they have expertise and a lot to contribute to the world, and really think together about what that means for our substance use prevention efforts that are meant for young people, that are meant to serve young people. So in terms of the plan for today, I would like to define what I mean by youth engagement. I would like to talk a little bit about readiness. So thinking about yourself and your organization. How do you know if your organization is ready for youth engagement? Then think about capacity. What are the real competencies that are needed for meaningful youth engagement? We'll have some time to go deeper in breakout rooms, noting that this is a big group, but we will still get a chance to talk in a little more depth in breakout rooms. And then we'll share back what we learned and identify some next steps for your own youth engagement. In terms of learning objectives, I hope by the end of today, you'll be able to define youth engagement and describe some different models, assess your own readiness and your organization's readiness by naming your own assets and barriers to youth engagement, understand 3 competencies that I propose are needed for meaningful youth engagement in substance use prevention, and identify one step that you can take to either begin or deepen your youth engagement in prevention. So I think it's important to start with some definitions, and a good place to start is, what do I even mean by youth engagement? So youth itself is a very, very broad term. Developmental psychologists both love and hate the question, what do we mean, right? What do we mean by youth? One developmental psychologist defines adolescence specifically as, quote, chronological hostages of a time warp between biological age and social age. Some psychologists, another variation on that theme is we define adolescence as beginning in biology and ending in society. meaning we often think about adolescence, the onset of adolescence, as beginning with puberty and all the physical, physiological, hormonal changes that happen in the brain at the onset of puberty. And we often think about adolescence ending when you take on social roles of adults. So that used to be really thinking about stable jobs or marriage and family. Now young people are delaying those stable social roles if they're doing them at all. So of course our social context has changed a lot. But the point here is it's kind of hard to define an age range when we say youth, or even adolescence specifically. But when I'm talking about youth, I mean adolescents and young adults, roughly between the ages of 11 and 25. So that's a huge age range, but that is roughly what I mean when I say youth. I am specifically really interested and passionate about kind of middle adolescence, so middle school to high school. So you might think about 11 to 18-year-olds, and a lot of what I'm talking about today is specific to that age range, adolescence. But in general, I like to use this broad term youth because I think young adults can also contribute to substance use prevention in very meaningful ways. So I'm going to use this broad term, but I just want to say we should all think very carefully about the age and stage of the young people who we are serving and working alongside when we talk about youth-focused prevention. Okay, so what do I mean by youth engagement? I have a specific way of thinking about youth engagement and substance use prevention, and I think it's important to get really clear because you may use it a different way. So when I say youth engagement, I am talking about an approach to prevention. So it's kind of a mindset. It's kind of a comprehensive way of thinking about the role of young people in substance use prevention that you can take as an individual and as an organization. And I think about prevention organizations effectively engaging youth as leaders or partners in planning, tailoring, implementing, and evaluating prevention programming. So this is different than, I'm not talking necessarily about delivering a curricula or a program to youth. So I think a lot of people, when they think about youth engagement, they think I'm having an event, I want a lot of people to attend. And that's what they talk about as youth engagement, reach, or I'm implementing a curriculum. If you reach 50 or 100 adolescents, a lot of people think about that as engaging young people. And I'm using it in quite a different way, in a little bit more, in a very different way, to mean how we partner with young people and really think about co-designing, co-leading, and really amplifying the voice and expertise of young people to inform everything we do in prevention. So it's not a specific curriculum I'm talking about. I will say there are some really good off-the-shelf kind of youth engagement or youth empowerment curricula that many of you might use or be involved in, but I'm not talking about a specific kind of prevention program today. I'm talking about an approach to prevention. So in this way of thinking about youth engagement, I think there are a lot of different goals that are important to keep in mind, right? So you might be thinking, well, why do that? Why, should I be partnering and amplifying the voices of youth? Well, one of the goals of youth engagement, in the way I'm defining it, is to really increase the relevance of the prevention program, policy, or practice that we want to implement. Another goal is really to increase the reach, uptake, quality, and responsiveness of the prevention that's aimed towards young people. So much of the prevention work that we do is aimed towards young people because that's when a lot of substance use behaviors begin, right, in adolescence. So sometimes we have programs that are great. There are great evidence-based prevention programs out there, but the goal of youth engagement as an approach to prevention really thinks about, well, how do we increase the reach? What about these events that no one attends? What about these programs that don't seem to stick? What about these curriculum that are boring, right? How do we increase how responsive all of our prevention efforts are, whether programs or policies or practices, just increasing the responsiveness and the quality and the uptake to young people. And I'm offering that youth engagement is an approach to do that. It's also a way to collect ongoing insight, right? Youth culture changes. Young people are different. There's no one youth culture, right? So, and as youth culture changes and different groups change, and maybe the groups that we're working with in our community change, having a youth engagement approach, meaning really partnering with young people to improve prevention and collect ongoing insights as our environment and social context changes. Youth engagement can also provide opportunities to youth themselves for skill development, for support, for connection, and for contribution. So we'll talk more about how young people really often need and don't have meaningful ways to contribute to the world around them. And if we can, as substance use prevention providers, can partner with young people, we can really offer skill development and relationships between adults and young people, and between young people and their peers, and offer support and connection that can be really meaningful to youth development. And finally, goals of youth engagement are building youth capacity. So we as a prevention workforce want the field of prevention science to live on. So I think helping, partnering with young people now when they're young can ignite, spark passion for prevention and for health and well-being, and build skills and build networks that keeps young people wanting to be in the career that we are all in, which is in prevention. So those are some of the goals that I would say are really important, and why I would say youth engagement is very important and helpful in prevention. Now, I do want to mention, because I think of youth engagement as an approach, it's not necessarily an individual like strategy. It can work within many existing prevention approaches and strategies. So if you're someone who thinks about the CSAP prevention strategies, I want to offer that youth engagement can work right alongside all of them. So as just one example, if you're doing an information dissemination strategy, maybe you have developed pamphlets that are about substance use, and maybe you want to get those in the hands of young people. A youth engagement approach would say, what should be in those pamphlets? What research needs to be done that is youth-centered, to, like, what information should we share? How should we design the pamphlets? What should they look like? Where should we put them? Where are the young people we're trying to reach, and how can we effectively reach them? So a youth engagement approach would involve youth as partners in every step of the research, evaluation, developing the information, and the dissemination approach in that. So youth engagement is not like a separate thing, but can work alongside CSAP strategies. Youth engagement, in the way I'm thinking about it, also fits within the SPIF. So many of you, I'm sure, familiar with and use the Strategic Prevention Framework. And I would offer that youth can be effectively engaged as partners in all aspects of the SPIF. So when we're doing needs assessment in our community, youth can be partners in that, right? In all the aspects of what we do with the SPIF. So I'm going to go a little deeper in what I mean by youth engagement and what some different models of youth engagement will look like. In the next few slides, I will be speaking from this information guide series, and here's a QR code. It's publicly available, and please click on that and use it as helpful to you. We in North Carolina have been involved for about 9 years in trying to understand what youth engagement is happening in our state, trying to understand what the needs are for training and how we can amplify the voices of young people in prevention to supplement what's already being done. So we did develop this information guide in 2023, and it's publicly available. So a lot of the next slides, the content that I'll be talking about comes from this guide. And so I want you to know that you have it in case you have questions or want more information about kind of the youth engagement models that I'm about to talk about. So there are a lot of different ways to talk about youth engagement, even by the specific definition I'm offering, which is partnering with youth as leaders. People have different ways of thinking about that. I like to think about 4 different general models of youth engagement, and those I call youth consultant models, youth board models, youth partner models, and youth-led models. And one way we can think about different models of youth engagement is by thinking about a ladder. So if your coalition or organization or research team or whoever you're here representing, if you're getting started with youth engagement, or if you have a kind of a low level of need or capacity, starting with a lower intensity youth engagement model might be perfect for you. And that's what I call youth consultant models. That's kind of at the bottom of the ladder. And then as you work up the ladder, you kind of increase the level of youth leadership, and it requires more capacity and more support to implement successfully. So I'm going to talk through each of these models and give examples of what they might entail and what they might look like in prevention, but I do want to make one point here, and that is, I don't think the goal of every organization or coalition necessarily needs to be to climb to the top of the ladder. And I think that's kind of implied by a ladder graphic, so I want to be really clear that I think the important thing is to think really carefully about your coalition, your organization, and what your needs are and what you can do right now. And when in doubt, I think starting slow and with like a lower level of youth engagement as an approach is a strong way to go. So what are these mean? What could they look like? Starting at the bottom of the ladder, this model, youth consultant models, I would describe as adults are still primarily deciding on prevention efforts, and youth advise on specific aspects of different programs or initiatives. So this model is especially useful for organizations maybe just starting out with youth engagement because it requires a lower level of organizational and youth capacity. Still, though, organizations need to think about a lot of complicated things like how to compensate youth for their expertise, and also be really wary of not tokenizing youth by, for example, making a couple young people speak for all youth, and also not using this approach as a rubber stamp. So this is a real potential risk of youth consultant models is you hire a couple consultants, maybe you even pay them appropriately for their expertise, but then you have only two speaking for all like youth, and just asking them, oh, well, we got their input one time or two times, we're good to go. Now it's a youth approved program. And this is a risk with the kind of consultant model. Still though, hiring youth as consultants can be very powerful, right? If that's a starting point for you to amplify voice in your prevention efforts. Small groups of youth can serve as consultants, or groups can change depending on initiative and program needs. I would guess a lot of prevention, like a lot of organizational staff that I talk to are maybe somewhere here. I think even lower on the ladder or off the ladder are what I would call very traditional approaches to prevention, where adults are totally designing curriculum and delivering them to youth. So I think youth consultant models are where a lot of people sit. They're like, we think it's really important to get some youth voice. And so we kind of have some youth that we consult from time to time. And moving up the ladder a bit to youth board models. So this is where I would describe this as like adults are still primarily deciding on prevention efforts. So adults maybe, and I mean in your organization or your coalition, but asking youth to advise on various issues in an ongoing way. And I think this model is especially useful for organizations who want to build a sustainable infrastructure for gathering youth input and who have some existing capacity and maybe some youth relationships already in place. So if you have young people, maybe you partner with a school or an after-school club. If you have young people that you kind of have relationships with, then that might lend itself nicely to developing a youth board, especially if you're hoping to have an ongoing structure. So typically with this model, youth receive a higher level of training. So for example, youth might receive training on effective meeting structures, on decision-making, and on organizational operations. If your organization is forming a youth board, they might need to know how your organization works. How do decisions get made? These have become very popular. I sit in the research world in the School of Medicine, and I will say all of a sudden, most studies I know have advisory boards. They're developing advisory boards, which again, I think I view that positively. Like there's a real movement to amplify the voices of all kinds of stakeholders in the work that we do, which I think is great. There are some things to be wary of. One thing I see come up a lot is the issue of what will you do with the advice of advisory boards. And this is complicated. This seems like an obvious point if you form an advisory board, being prepared to use the advice or at least know your process for considering the advice. But I see all the time, and in fact, I've done this myself, where we formed an advisory board, solicited a lot of input, and it just hasn't really gone anywhere for whatever reason, even with good intentions. And this is, of course, very disempowering. Anyone on this call who's been on an advisory board may have had this experience as an advisor. It can be very disempowering, but especially for young people, given their developmental stage, it can be really hard to serve on an advisory board and never have anything done with your advice. So that's something to be wary of. With advisory boards, large groups of youth may serve for long pre-specified times. Ideally, there's overlap between board members rotating off and new board members coming on, and that can be a nice structure, especially with young people who are often in a pretty transitory stage of life, maybe like rotating out of middle school and into high school. We're often seeing that it's hard to retain young people on an advisory board. All right, moving up the ladder, next I would think of this category of youth partner models. And here I would describe these as youth and adults partner in prevention efforts. Youth can serve in many different roles, like researchers, evaluators, advocates, staff, or implementers. I think of this as a very general model that can look a lot of different ways. So this is, to me, the most flexible type of youth model. The nature of the youth partner, what role they're in, really depends on the needs of the organization and the skills and the goals that the youth partners themselves have. So I think in this model, youth partners really do need a higher level of training and experience because they'll have more involved roles, because in this, they're really co-leading programs or initiatives. So this is really where we get to youth-adult partnerships. In this youth engagement model, the key really is that youth are engaged as again, partners and co-leaders. And I think this is especially useful for organizations with existing organizational capacity. So for example, you've had, like, you're an organization and your staff has had training and experience with youth engagement before, and ideally partnerships with young people already in place, or relationships with youth organizations where there's potential to develop those partnerships. So thinking about some of your organizations probably partner with your school system. So if you are already working in partnership with an after-school club, then that's a really fertile ground. You're already you have youth, those relationships in place. That's a really fertile ground to develop that into a deeper youth adult partnership for your prevention organization. Often I think something that works well is prevention organizations start with an idea of how to partner with youth, and then work with youth to co-develop the exact goals and nature of the partnership. So that can evolve over time. Youth can partner in specific aspects of a prevention effort. Like if you have an initiative that you're looking to get off the ground, they might specifically partner in like how to do that, but ideally they have a role in co-designing what that really looks like. But typically their involvement is more comprehensive and involves partnering in multiple aspects of prevention. So moving up the ladder a little bit further, at the top of the ladder, we have what I would call youth-led models. And it's at the top of the ladder for a reason. It's hard to do. And I'm very curious. I'm sure there are people on this webinar who are involved with youth-led work. It's hard and it is beautiful. And it's especially useful for organizations with really long-standing partnerships with youth already in place. And I think, for example, an organization, let's say you have effectively had a youth advisory board for a couple of years, and you might have very skilled young people and strong partnerships. You might have some of your youth advisors propose an idea for a prevention initiative. And that might really come from them, but it's based on joint work and partnering for a couple of years and training. There's been groundwork, right, into the partnership and the training of everyone involved. Or your prevention organization might be partnering with a school club and be approached by youth from a different school wanting to start a prevention-related club or initiative. So the important thing here is that youth are really driving the idea, the development, the implementation, scaling, or evaluation, whatever is relevant, but they're asking you for support. So this is hard to kind of get to, and again, usually relies on some prior relationships and work to get to the level of youth actually coming up with ideas and asking for support. So that is a brief. Again, there's much more information in the information guide that gives actual examples of actual what this looks like for some people. But I hope at this point you're kind of persuaded at least that youth engagement can be a flexible approach with different models for amplifying the voices of young people that works within what your organization is already doing. And I want to emphasize again, I think your goal does not need to be to get to the top of the ladder or even to climb the ladder, but rather to find the right level and model of youth engagement depending on your current capacity and goals. If you wanted help thinking through your current capacity and goals, we have a decision tree tool in the information guide that can help, and it defines what we mean by organizational capacity and goals that can help you think through a model that might be good for you. I also want to point out where I think traditional prevention approaches differ from youth engagement approaches. So in traditional approaches, often our youth-focused prevention is education first, really focused on teaching youth to say no. Whereas I think in youth engagement approaches, we're really focused on listening first, enlisting youth to understand problems and form solutions. Now, in a youth engagement approach, you might land on the fact that you need a skills training to help youth say no. Like that is a reasonable thing to do. And there's good evidence-based prevention programs to do that. The difference in youth engagement approach is really starting with listening to young people first as partners and enlisting them to identify problems and solutions. In traditional prevention, often prevention is one-time or short-term programming, whereas in a youth engagement approach, we often think about sustained participation of youth with our organizations over time. In traditional approaches, most often adults design and deliver content, whereas in youth engagement approaches, youth co-design and co-lead. In traditional approaches, youth are often the targets of intervention, whereas in youth engagement approaches, youth are really thought of more as partners, again, in designing who are the intervention targets and what should we be doing with prevention. In traditional approaches, the focus is usually at the individual level and usually focused on behavior change and does not always engage communities or systems in the prevention efforts. Whereas youth engagement approaches really are multi-level. really focus on both individual level, building individual protective factors, but also building youth-adult partnerships and also connecting youth to community power and to systems change. So if you're someone who thinks about individual level versus environmental strategies and prevention, youth engagement's kind of a bridge where we want to build individual level prevention, right? Build protective factors and minimize risk factors for individuals. But doing that is all skill building, capacity building in service of making systems change. So we partner with youth to build their own development while thinking about how we work together to change systems and maybe implement policies or think about environmental strategies. And I do give slide credit to my colleague, Kristen Kidd, who came up with this slide, and I liked it a lot. So at this point, you might be thinking, well, I'm not doing youth engagement, but it sounds amazing. It sounds great, and it sounds like the magic bullet and the secret sauce. And while I do think it is beautiful, I also, of course, want to talk about how it's challenging. And it's not all roses. There are a lot of challenges with youth engagement, and people on the webinar who have done some of this maybe will see themselves in some of this content. But at the individual level, power sharing is hard. So thinking about staff at organizations, especially adults, sharing power, like actually thinking about, what if youth say something I don't want to do? Like, what if we have a youth advisory board and they come up with an initiative and I do not think it's right? Like, what do you do? It actually gets really hard. It's really easy to say value youth input, and really hard to figure out how to live that out. It's also challenging. Young people are a really transient stage of life. Like, young people are going through developmental changes, but also like just logistically, they move, they go through middle school or high school or and beyond. It's hard to just keep up with young people, even once you develop these great relationships. There are logistical barriers on our end, like adults in organizations, and then especially for youth, right? Transportation is one that comes up over and over. How do young people get to these, clubs or partnerships or organizations? Time, young people are busy. They're so busy. Their time is full. How do we get people with time? Funding is such a huge issue, right? How do we fund this? We know things that bring youth to partnerships include food and funding and fun, and that takes money. And it's not always clear how to fund that. Finding the right youth is a challenge, right? Not necessarily tapping into young people who get invited for everything, but thinking about who really do we need representing the young people in our community who we want to serve. And then sustaining commitment and motivation is a real challenge for all the reasons that we've already mentioned. It's hard to keep people engaged in anything, adults too. Then there's organization and system level challenges. Funding constraints I've already mentioned, but we all live in a world where we're within complex organizations and communities. We have state level funding constraints and we have a national funding landscape, and we all work within these constraints. So it can be very confusing. What are we actually allowed to fund? How can we use our funding? How do we get enough funding to do this? There's training needs for both organizations and staff. There's this idea of being embedded within complex systems and communities. And then there's an issue of like your organization, you might be, oh, this is great, like I'm on board, or, I really believe in this, but organizations have to be ready. You have to have readiness and capacity in order for youth engagement to really work well. So I want to turn to talking about this idea of readiness. And really, in the next few slides, thinking about how it can be very challenging to go from thinking about youth engagement as a great idea to actually implementing it in a way that works. Again, because we all work within these complex prevention organizations, communities, statewide systems, and under national policies. If we don't have readiness individually and as an organization, then our youth engagement efforts might fail. And I have seen this happen a lot. And that might lead us to the incorrect conclusion that the youth engagement didn't work because of the youth, because of their interest or their knowledge, when in reality, it's us adults often, or our organization, that were not prepared, that didn't have readiness to really implement a youth engagement approach. So in the chat, I would love to hear, how did you know, if you're an organization who is doing youth engagement, defined as really partnering with youth, how did you know your organization was ready to develop this kind of youth engagement work that you do? If not, how will you know? In other words, what's an aspect do you think of readiness? Like, what will you be looking out for to know if your organization is ready to really implement youth engagement and partner with youth? So the question is, how do you know your organization is ready for partnering with youth in a really meaningful way? The input of youth, not just tokenizing them, okay? A board. an acronym. I'm not sure I know what it meant, and then it went off my screen. Informants help to know. Okay, so like maybe that means youth needs. Oh, understanding youth needs. Oh, I see. I didn't see that. Okay. The interest of youth wanting to get involved. Okay, so how will you know if your organization's ready? A lot of that was focused. A lot of the answers were focused on asking youth a readiness assessment, looking for the next step to meet youth where they are. Great. Building stronger relationships in our schools, and I can't see the rest of that chat because they're flying off. But that's the partnership building. Your own comfort as a coalition. That's yes, your own comfort is key. Each decision has youth input. Trained staff and educated everyone on substance use. Yes, okay, these are great. So these hit on a lot of the important, actually multi-level, both like individually, the attitudes and emotional readiness of the people who will be implementing it, but also organizationally, and also the idea of asking young people or doing a formal needs assessment or readiness assessment with your organization. I love that. So there are a lot of different models for thinking about readiness. And there's one from implementation science that defines readiness in general for anything, or I should say for an innovation to your organization, as the extent to which a setting is willing and able to implement an innovation. And by this definition, readiness has three general components: general capacity, motivation, and innovation-specific capacity. So in our case, the innovation we're talking about is youth engagement. So I'm going to go through a little bit of what these mean and what they might mean for thinking about whether your own organization is ready for youth engagement. So general capacity. This can be thought of as resources, culture, and effective leadership. And this is in general any innovation you want to adopt as your organization. You need these things in place. Resources, general staff retention, and generally stable budget. So if you're going to introduce a youth engagement approach where you're partnering with young people, it's really helpful to have a budget that's not constantly in a frenzy. And this is hard, right? I think we all live in a world where we're constantly grant writing, but having a stable budget really helps when you're wanting to onboard young people into an environment to feel pretty stable, and to have staff that are retained is really helpful. So you don't keep having turnover in the people that the young people are working with. So your organizational person who's going to interface with your youth. Do you have a culture of respect in general? Do you have a commitment to learning and growing? And do you have existing relationships with community organizations? I know somebody mentioned that specifically in the chat. So really taking inventory of like, is this generally a place where there's respect and a commitment to learning and growing? Because if we're onboarding youth, and youth might give us feedback, they developmentally have a high need to feel respected, but also to feel like what they're saying matters and has potentially some influence on the organization. And then effective leadership. So having leaders that are open to feedback is really helpful, because at the base of it, what we're asking for when we do youth engaged work is youth feedback to improve the prevention we're doing. Are the leaders open to that? So not just me, but my supervisor, my boss, thinking again about all the layers of complexity that we're embedded in organizations. And also members of organizations have clear roles and feel valued. And that can be especially helpful for defining the role of who's going to really be in charge, who's going to lead up the youth engagement piece of the work. So that's general capacity. We also want to think about motivation. So thinking about your organization's motivation, which we can think about as beliefs and compatibility. So beliefs, like what are your organization, what are the beliefs about young people? And especially thinking about the age that you're trying to engage with, right? Do we have a generally positive stance about adolescents in our community? Or is it more of a negative stance, like adolescents are problems to be fixed or solved, right? And thinking, because that can guide you on how to start. Like, do we need to start by really taking stock of how do we actually feel? And I hope people on the call would say they have a positive, respectful view of adolescents, but honestly, all of us live in a place where the narratives about adolescents are negative. So sometimes we all have some bias about young people that can be helpful to really articulate and talk about. And that may be true within your organization. What are the beliefs about youth engagement, right? Is there a belief that it's going to be hard and we're going to have to invest time, but that it'll be worth it? Or is there a belief that it'll just be a little bit of work? And, so really thinking about what are our beliefs about what youth engagement will do for our organization. Also compatibility. Does youth engagement align with the missions, organization, and goals? Are people interested and exciting about the additional work, time, investment that it takes to really partner deeply with young people? And then thinking about what's spurring youth engagement processes. And here, I think often it's a grant deliverable. And I've seen this, and I think this is for better and for worse. Some funding mechanisms really want to see youth engagement. I think that's great because it takes seriously the idea of funding. Hopefully the grant will fund young people for their expertise, but it also can create a situation where your organization may not have the capacity, the training, the experience to partner with young people, but you're expected to for a grant. So it's okay, but it's just really being serious about thinking about, okay, what is spurring our desire for youth engagement, and being aware of it being transactional, one-off, or limited in scope, so that you set yourself up from the beginning for successful, deep partnerships with young people, and or being really clear with the young people about what is it about, what is the scope, what are the expectations, where will we meet barriers. There are also a lot of specific capacity needs for youth engagement. This table comes from an analysis that's ongoing of some of my colleagues, Dr. Heather Kennedy and Dr. Michelle Abrazinskis, and they did an analysis of YPAR, which stands for Youth Participatory Action Research. So they looked at published articles and talked to research teams that are doing youth partnered research, and came up with these types of resources that the teams say are specific capacity needed for youth engaged research. But I think these all apply to our substance use prevention as well. So I'm going to go through the next few slides and give examples. So specific capacity needs for youth partnered research are resources, training and preparation, student or youth characteristics, adult characteristics, and facilitator skills. So what do I mean? And again, this is work from my colleagues. They found resources that are specific to youth engagement include staffing. Do you have the right people on your staff in place? Time. Does that person have time carved out and funded to really devote to youth partnered, youth engaged efforts? Transportation. That gets back to youth need transportation to be able to participate in meetings. Likewise, organizational staff need transportation to get to maybe where youth are. Is it schools or where you're going to meet? Space. Do you have a physical space that's inviting for young people? Is there parking there? If they can get there at all, does a bus stop near there? How are young people going to get to some physical space where they can interact? Or if not physical space, technology. Are we meeting virtually? Do young people have the tech that they need to meaningfully participate in our meetings? Funding is a big one, always back to funding. Can we properly compensate young people for their expertise? And then ability and inclusion resources. So we really need to make sure that youth of different ability and with different inclusion needs, that their needs are met, right? Is the physical space welcoming to people who have physical needs, et cetera? In terms of training and preparation, my colleagues are finding that some specific types of training and preparation are needed for youth partnered research. And that is initial training for adult partners. So adult partners need some training, and I'll get to this in the next section of my presentation, what I think they need training in, but like adult partners need some training in youth adult partnerships, and initial and ongoing training for the youth partners. Often our youth partners need some training in substance use prevention, like that's our expertise, and young people often need some training in what is prevention, some of the facts around substance use. Young people often need training in things like how do I come to a meeting? Like what is an agenda? How do I participate in a meeting, and that kind of training. Curriculum guides and toolkits are resource needs for youth engagement, and ongoing support, coaching, and TA. And this comes up a lot from people who say, okay, I have a youth engagement strategy and I'm starting to implement it, but then I'm going to run into problems, right? If people run into problems and need some support to troubleshoot. Some of the student characteristics, these overlap a lot with the adult characteristics, but we need, for the young people, interest in time, technology, and transportation can really be helpful to have connections with other participants. So I think a really nice model sometimes is if, for example, you're starting a youth board, to have two people who know each other joining together. That can help increase comfort level, but also accountability, and really make young people feel more welcome in a space if they're really connected to other participants. Adult characteristics, many of these we've talked about. It can be very helpful, for example, to have multiple adult facilitators when you're doing youth partnered work, to have attitudes and beliefs about young people that are generally positive. To have some history in your organization is really helpful, because part of what adults can really do to support youth is we know how things work in our institution and our organization, and that can be really important. And an openness to learning. So young people really find it better and helpful to work with adults who are open to learning. So these are some of the adult characteristics that come up. Sorry, there we go. So facilitation is a huge part of youth engagement approaches. And so I want to draw a distinction between traditional facilitation when we think about delivering curriculum to young people and how that might differ from a facilitator of more of a youth engagement approach when we're thinking about partnering with youth. So in a youth engagement approach, the facilitator's job is not so much delivering content, but creating the conditions for young people to lead. So whereas we think about traditional facilitation teaching content at youth, and youth engagement facilitators are really asking questions to surface what youth already know. Instead of designing the project, which is often the case in traditional facilitation, youth engagement facilitators really facilitating youth decision-making about the project. And instead of speaking for a group, in youth engagement facilitation is more coaching youth and how to speak for themselves, often creating opportunities for them to do that in public. So building public speaking skills. Instead of fixing problems, which is often the adult role in traditional prevention, in youth engagement approaches, we really think about holding space while youth themselves work through problems. So you're collaborating with young people to solve the problems that come up rather than fixing problems. And this is often really challenging if we're used to a more traditional model. And finally, traditional, if we're thinking about delivering traditional prevention, we might think about measuring compliance with the curriculum, let's say. But in a youth engagement approach, facilitators are more thinking about observing and documenting youth growth and leadership and capacities. So hopefully this helps clarify a little bit what a traditional facilitated prevention program might look like and how that might differ from a youth engagement approach facilitation. So what might you do to think about organizational readiness? So these are actions that might support a thoughtful approach for your organization to youth engagement. First is really thinking about alignment between youth engagement and your organization's mission and vision, and just making sure there is alignment. Like, what is your ultimate, mission of your organization, and how does that align with what youth engagement, really partnering with youth, can bring? Gaining clarity, and really importantly, gaining consensus on the purpose of youth engagement within your organization. So it may be that you think it's a great idea and you have a real passion for it, but unless you have buy-in from others and clarity around what we all collectively mean by engaging youth and partnering with them within our organization, then it might not work as well. Knowing your own organizational and bureaucratic landmines is really helpful, because we often get into system barriers when, like, I think of my organization, I'm going to be the youth engagement person. But then is my supervisor on board? Or are there actual limits, again, with like funding? Like, can we want to have this meetings where we have food? Can we actually spend funding on that? You have to really track down, like, what are some of the landmines where you're going to run into barriers? Defining what success looks like, of course, this is always a good idea, but it's really nice to start with that in mind. Like, is our success going to be a thriving youth board? Is it going to be a more youth responsive curriculum? Is this kind of 10-year project or a 1-year project, right? Just thinking about success, and then identifying additional training needs and possibilities for support and coaching that you need in order to enact. I am about to move on to the next section where we're going to talk about, okay, now we've thought about readiness. Maybe my organization is ready, maybe not, but then what are the competencies that we need for meaningful youth engagement? But I did want to pause and ask if there were questions in the chat that I should respond to. And I'll ask maybe Amber, was there anything to respond to? I just saw a couple come through.
Yeah, we have one specific question, but I'm thinking we'll probably get to this in the post-webinar breakout, but I'm going to give it to you and let me know how you want to proceed. It said, if I may, unless I missed this part, but I'm looking for specific examples in specific organizations where this has been successful.
Okay, great question. You have not missed it. I have not named specific organizations where this has been helpful. I am hoping that's exactly what I'm hoping in our breakout. We're going to break out into groups by your own self-reported sort of level or experience with youth engagement. And then when we come back, we're going to share back very specific examples. So thank you for the question. We will get much more specific. We have been talking at a more high level about what youth engagement means, what it might look like, and we will get to that. So thank you. And Amber, thank you. Nothing else it sounds like to respond to at the moment, then I'm gonna, okay.
That's
I'm gonna
correct,
turn to the last, perfect, okay. So, okay, what competencies are needed for meaningful youth engagement? I'm using the word competencies because I'm hearing a lot of discussion in the prevention workforce about what competencies are needed for the prevention workforce. So that's why I'm using that specific word. And I will offer that I think there are 3 competencies, or you might call them skills or knowledge areas, that are really needed if you're somebody in the prevention workforce working with effectively wanting to partner with young people. The first is a real understanding of adolescent development across key developmental domains and the core elements of youth-adult partnerships. I think this is necessary for us adults wanting to meaningfully partner with youth. The second is the ability to apply this understanding of adolescent development and youth-adult partnerships to the design of our meetings, our materials, and our programs. And the third are knowledge and skills to implement key relational practices that enable authentic collaboration between youth and adults. And let me talk about what I mean by each of these. And here's the paper. We wrote a paper. This is published, and the QR code, it's publicly available, I believe. And I also believe that this was sent out in advance of this webinar, so you should have it. But this is the paper where we talk about these 3 key competencies and basically a call to action to support youth engagement practice and research. So adolescent development and youth adult partnerships, what do we need to know? Well, adolescent development is complicated. There's a lot going on. Adolescents are developing physically, socially, cognitively. And the more we understand about adolescent brain and bodies and social development, the more we can really effectively partner with young people. I do realize the text is small on this, but I really wanted to show this resource, which comes from UCLA, from the Center for the Developing Adolescent. And I really strongly point you to their website. The UCLA Center for the Developing Adolescent has a lot of really good resources, one-pagers, summaries and research briefs, but also materials you can actually use and activities with young people. So I would suggest you check it out. But they have this one-pager where they summarize the research from developmental science on key developmental needs of adolescents. And I'll just highlight a couple. So the science, the evidence of adolescent development shows us that adolescents need safe and satisfying ways to explore the world and take healthy risks and test out new ideas and experiences. Now, this is something we can provide, right, in the prevention workforce with when we partner with young people, we can provide safe and satisfying ways to explore the world and take healthy risks. They need real world scenarios in which to build decision-making and emotion regulation skills. Another thing we can offer in our partnerships, any interactions we have with young people, but especially if we're partnering with young people in prevention, we can offer real, actual problems in our community that young people can help solve. Avenues to develop a sense of meaning and purpose by contributing. I think this is one of the few things that adolescents don't have access to that we really need, which is opportunities to contribute. Like if we take adolescents seriously, we're going to create opportunities for them to contribute to our prevention work, and it's going to improve our prevention, but also really support adolescent development. So I'm going to continue on, but I just wanted you to make sure you have this resource about adolescents' developmental needs. That's one example of what I think adults in the prevention workforce would benefit so much from knowing about the developmental needs of adolescents. There are also a lot of features of adolescence that if we really understand, then we can use them positively and harness them in our youth-adult partnerships. So some features of adolescent development: reward sensitivity in the brain is heightened. Right? So adolescents really seek novelty, peers, and social approval. And that can drive behavior more so than logic, especially during kind of middle adolescence, so kind of 11 to 15. Identity is actively forming. So youth are deciding who they are, and who they think they are shapes choices they make. Now, the vice reverse is also true. Choices they make shapes who they are. But if we can appeal to adolescents forming identity, then we can really help support adolescent development while we partner with them in prevention. Peer influence is also at its peak. And this is often talked about as a risk factor, right? We know peer influences and social influences make adolescents more likely to use substances, but this can also work for prevention, not only against it. And finally, because of cognitive development during adolescence, they are really developing the capacity for systems thinking. So thinking about middle schoolers specifically, they're starting to grasp the idea of community and complexities and root causes of problems and how things are interconnected. So if we flip this, everything that makes adolescence risky is also what can make adolescence so powerful. And if we understand this, can really, really transform our youth-adult partnerships with youth. Reward sensitivity, can we channel it towards meaningful action and recognition? Can we make our can we recognize the young people for the work they do? That can really literally activate, areas and circuitry in the brain that makes them likely to come back to our meetings, right? Or we can recognize people once we understand that that's a really important thing for adolescent development. Identity development, we can help young people build identities as a leader and a problem solver, as a member of a community. Peer influence, when we understand the importance of peer influence, which I bet most of us on the call do, we can transform how we think about peer influence and think about youth leaders who can model prevention in ways that are more persuasive than adult-only curriculum. If we can capitalize on systems thinking, we can invite young people to solve real problems in our communities, like with prevention. We can invite young people to be thought partners in these really complex problems that need solving, and that will help them feel a sense of efficacy and also contribution, and actually really be contributing to our prevention efforts. So the second competency that I'm offering that we need is then being able to apply. So if we can get ourselves training in adolescent development and youth adult partnerships, the next step is going from that awareness and insights to then applying it. And I think one thing you can do, and this is one step you could take, is to audit your programs or your materials or your organization's opportunities for youth responsiveness. So what does it look like? What do your meetings look like? When you're inviting youth to meetings, really think about, how is your space set up? Who is there? Do your adults stand at the front of the room and have the young people sit down? Can you have it be more of a circle than a classroom feel? Can you, just really auditing your, very much in the details of your meetings, your materials, how youth friendly are they? And I will share some tools that can hopefully guide in how you do that. After you audit your, whatever it is that you're wanting to think about, whether it's a curriculum or materials or meetings, can you change, tailor, and co-create with youth development in mind? So can you, it's not necessarily starting over, but if you have a pamphlet that has worked kind of well, can you, create a channel for youth feedback and co-design a pamphlet that might work 10 times as well because of the color changes or the who you hand it out to or how the information is presented, right? So if it's a pamphlet, if it's whatever it is that you're working on in your prevention efforts, can you, by auditing opportunities for youth responsiveness, then make changes with what you have learned about youth development in mind? I'm not going to go through the details of this. I also realize the text is small, but I really wanted to show this resource. It is by my colleague, Dr. Heather Kennedy. This is based on research she did where she observed youth empowerment after school programs, and she categorized what she saw as adultist practices. Now, these were programs that are meant to be empowering youth programs, and she categorized some practices like policing and lecturing that she talked about as being missed opportunities for learning and skill development and things that disrupt trust. So I think this is a really nice resource. So when we share slides afterwards, I want you to have it. But I think it's a really nice resource to audit your opportunities, to audit your meetings and your interactions. As you think honestly about your own interactions with the youth that you work with, you can say, do I do any of these, and what are my opportunities to change it? And I will invite you to have a learning stance. I will say, whenever I look at this, I know that I do them. No matter how much I think about, adolescent development, I know that I can tend towards lecturing. So I really invite you to think about this, not as a criticism, but like where can we make our practices more youth friendly? The third competency I think that's really needed is implementing key relational practices. So really thinking about so much of partnership with youth is not about content, but about our relationships. Some relational practices are supporting youth to make decisions, working jointly together with youth, reciprocal communication. So making sure our communications are bi-directional and that we have a feedback loop where we're really inviting feedback, using it, and responding back to young people, but also honoring our own expertise as adults. That's also very important. And sharing power, which is a relational practice that's easy to put on a slide and hard to do in real life. I also have a resource for you from my same colleague, Dr. Heather Kennedy, who developed this based on the same project of the adultist practice handout. But this she calls Working with Youth, Practices that Support Genuine Youth-Adult Collaboration. And I really like this. I'm also not going to go through every practice, but for people looking for specificity, these are really good practices. Again, when you audit your own youth-facing meetings or materials, and you think about how you're facilitating with intention. Are there opportunities to let youth lead? So whether it's voting on day-to-day decisions, like how the meeting will be run, or project level decisions, like where are the small and big opportunities that youth can really lead? And there's other really great stuff in here. I think Learn to Let Go is a really great one that's, again, hard to do. But I invite you to take a look at this resource. And again, credit to Dr. Heather Kennedy, who developed this resource based on her own research. So that was a whole lot of me talking, and I hope you got some nuggets out of it. I hear the request for more specificity, and so I'm really pleased to say in a moment we're going to be able to go deeper by getting into breakout rooms together. So in a moment, you will be offered a selection of breakout rooms, and you will get to choose where you go. There is absolutely no right answer. No one's checking to make sure you're in the right room. This is just by self-report of where you think you would benefit from today. And these rooms will be based on your own youth engagement experience. So room 1, these are for people who are just getting started with youth engagement. So keep in mind the definition of youth engagement. I put it on the slide below, but thinking about youth engagement as an approach to prevention, where we're effectively engaging youth as leaders and partners. If you're someone who hasn't really done that, then maybe you want to go in room 1. This is the just getting started with youth engagement, room 1. So those are for self-identified beginners. Room 2 is people who are calling, I've dipped a toe in, and the challenges are really salient to me. So maybe you've tried some stuff. Maybe you're part of an organization who's tried some youth engagement approaches. Maybe you've had some success, but maybe also you've really met with some barriers and challenges. Room 2 is for you. You're really going to kind of talk about sticky points. Like what barriers did you really find? Room 3, this is for people who have had some success and specifically are trying to relaunch. And this is kind of interesting. This is for people who I've heard a lot from people who post-COVID have had their youth boards just go underground, or they can't get people engaged in online meetings, or for whatever reason, like relaunching is really hard. So the room 3 is for you if you've had some success before, but you're specifically in a place of trying to relaunch your youth engagement efforts. Room 4, we're calling got a good thing going. So, and your focus on sustaining or deepening. So if you're maybe you're even supporting some youth-led, maybe you're an organization who's had a maybe you're a youth empowerment organization, you've had a long-standing youth-led projects. Maybe room 4 is for you if you're thinking about sustaining or deepening or providing advice to people just starting out. Then room 4 is for you. Each room will have a facilitator. Thank you to the PTTC team. So it will be a facilitated discussion, and we'll spend about 15 minutes in breakout rooms. Given the size of this webinar, I think there's hundreds of us on here. I'm not totally sure of the total number, but these rooms are going to be big. So this is not going to be deep discussion, but it's more going to be asking some people to come off mute and share an experience and share, just a little bit of what they're doing, and asking people to be really active in the chat. And so what we will do is collect all the information we learn from all the different rooms, and we will share back with you what we learn. I will compile it in a way that I hope is useful, and we'll share back what we learn in that way. And this is also helpful to us as we're trying to understand future youth engagement training needs, and it tends to really differ depending on your background experience. So we're really trying to understand what some of the needs are of people who are in different levels and stages of youth engagement. So I think that's enough setup. So just to recap, you're going to, in a moment, self-select a room based on these descriptions. You'll get in the room. I hope you'll come off mute. I hope you'll be active in the chat. Each room has different discussion questions. We'll come back together in 15-ish minutes, and we will share back a little tidbit of what we learned from each group, and then move on a little bit to conclude the webinar. So at this point, if you would launch the rooms and let people get into their breakout rooms, that would be great. And I'll stop sharing. Actually, I'm going to keep sharing until people go so they have.
I have launched the breakout room, and a pop-up should come on your computer that allows you to select which session. So go ahead and go into whatever group that you are going to self-select.
Great, thanks, Amber. So people should be popping out and getting into different rooms, and we'll see you back in the main room in about 15 minutes. We have about 7 minutes left together, so I would love to share back very briefly. I'm going to ask facilitators to share like a sentence or two, one point that came up that really struck you, not a summary of your whole discussion, and then we'll close out our time together. So why don't we start with group 1, room 1.
Yeah, so room 1 was, we're at the beginning stages of youth engagement. We don't really have much experience, and something we talked about a lot was engaging schools. Like, how do you even get in with a school? Like, what does that look like? Because, and we had a lot of experience in our group with people who had actually worked in schools. And I think some themes were getting an administrator or principal on board, or finding your champion, like finding one person in the school that can, like, you can really like connect with, who gets your mission, who can help you kind of break in. Let's see. A community coalition was also mentioned, like who's already in the school. And we talked a lot about like what is preventing us from kind of moving forward and actually starting to do youth engagement. And there was a lot that we talked about with that. We talked about how do you transition from working with adults who have like one set of needs to like engaging youth who have shorter attention spans, who are used to having programming come at them and in one ear and out the other. How do you actually make your program like how do you make them see the importance of your program or actually engage with your program?
Yeah, that's perfect. I think that's you've surfaced some complexity. So that, yeah, no quick answers. Group, how about room 2? Any big takeaways?
Yes, one of the things that we discussed, or they discussed in the room, so we're room 2, so this is the group that have some experience with youth engagement, and there's some challenges that they noticed. But we noticed, or someone mentioned how it's been kind of challenging relating to the youth because of maybe like that age difference. And they've tried like maybe using like slang or like, you know, words or trendy words to kind of relate, and that's been a little bit challenging to relate. And then another person mentioned ways to kind of get over that barrier, and that's just basically letting the youth be the voice and having them speak and kind of be the leaders in the room. So yeah, just basically that age difference and that like generational difference and barrier with engaging with youth.
Those are big ones. How about room 3?
So room 3, we were groups that had successful youth engagement in the past, and they're working to relaunch and start a new or reinvigorate a group. There was a lot of talk about the interest of youth, that they're really busy and it's hard to find youth that are really interested. So they talked about different strategies, like they offer food and sometimes that doesn't work. Someone talked about offering an opportunity for scholarship as a potential, and gift cards. And then there was a lot of talk about partnering with other organizations in the community to support the work. And law enforcement was one that really came up as a great partner to bring in. And then working for food with Walmart, grocery stores, pizza. I can't remember. Domino's will often donate pizzas to youth groups. So, and finally, really tapping with the youth as you're developing the program and asking them, does this look cool? Does this sound good? Because someone on the group said, I'm 30 and I thought I was young enough to know, but no, we, after 22, I don't think we have our finger on the pulse anymore, and it's changing so rapidly, their culture. It's important to engage them in developing the program and having the right look and language and feel to the work.
Perfect. And there's some tangible advice in there. And as a reminder, I will compile what we've learned and share back. So I know this is going quickly, but we will share back some of this advice, especially. With that in mind, Amber, room 4, any takeaways or tips?
Yes, I was in room 4, and that was got a good thing going, focused on sustaining or deepening. And a summary of what was discussed is that building relationships are key, and building genuine relationships with the youth and viewing them as partners. But along with that, having the key personnel and staff that have the skills and the interest to be able to do that effectively. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I just got something popped up on my screen. And having not only the key staff, but the partnerships with the schools and other community partnerships to be able to do this work. And then one thing that we talked a lot about was allowing space to fail. So as adults, that can be very challenging, but allowing the space and the grace for students and youth to learn by things not going well or perfectly. And so that was really important, and it can be a huge challenge as well.
Well, thank you so much for that Blitz share back. You all did a great job summarizing, I'm sure, some really rich conversations very quickly. We will see what we found in the chat and from the notes and facilitators and share back what we learned. In our last 1 minute together, If you want to take a time to put this in the chat, please do. If not, take this with you and think about it as you have time, as you eat your lunch. But I just want people to think about what is one next step you can take to begin or deepen your youth engagement and your prevention work. Based on everything you've heard today, some of it was very high level, some of it very practical advice, but what is one step you can take wherever you are to deepen or begin your youth engagement and your prevention work? Just one small step sometimes can just get us in the right direction. So if you would like to put it in the chat, I would love to read them. If you don't have time, since we're pretty much at the end of our time together, think about that as you go about your day. Is there one step you can take in your own youth engagement efforts? The takeaway I would love you to leave with is partnering with youth can improve your youth focused prevention efforts. Absolutely. It is challenging and it's worthwhile. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here. Please consider me a resource. My email's up there and I like to be in touch. We will share the slides. I believe the recording will be shared with you all. So the resources will be in there and I would be happy to be in touch with you. Thank you so much to my funders, to my many teams, to the Southeast PTTC, and just thank you all for being here today. I think I turn it back to you, Amber.